and we've got 20 minutes.
Okay. Oh, you want me to hold that mic too?
Yeah, there you go. You've got to do 2 minutes.
What a great day to be an American, isn't it? Man, I had no idea that you guys were all hiding here in this beautiful little pocket. We turned off the freeway and went through just absolute gorgeous countryside, but it doesn't compare to seeing your faces and to seeing you dressed, many of you, in your bright colors, celebrating our country, celebrating our freedom. And I want to thank you for caring enough to be out here on a Tuesday night, because there's so many people who say that we don't have a chance, that America is finished, especially California. And you know what I say? I say we haven't been given real choices, because too often the party that is supposed to represent our values and our principles puts up candidates that don't. And that's not a fair choice. And then when the people are confronted with a choice between somebody who is milquetoast or somebody who's a real communist, they go for communism because it means a lot of free stuff. You know, I don't know what else you call it when you want to take away from those who have and those who have earned and give it to those who haven't. But those are the choices that we often have. And the average person out there who works for a living, they don't even know if they're a Republican or a Democrat till election time comes around. Well, I've been talking to an awful lot of them, and I've been talking to them about the 2014 election. And when I say, hey, I'm Tim Donnelly, and I hand them a card and I say, I'm considering running for governor of the great state of California, and I'm going to stand up for working people, they give me an earful about taxes. They give me an earful about how their gasoline prices just went up because they heard there's a new tax because they aren't using enough fuel. And they tell me that Jerry Brown's picked their pocket, and they have less money, and they don't mind paying taxes. They don't mind contributing. They don't mind doing their part. They're what we've come to know as the fair share. Right? Why is the fair share always pretty much everything I've got in my pocket? And then they give it to people, they actually pay people not to work for a living. And I will never understand that. If you're able-bodied, you ought to want to work. We ought to make work so plentiful and welfare so scarce that everybody is excited. And instead of being able to hold this meeting in this room, we ought to be in the football stadium up the street, and we ought to pack that out with freedom-loving Americans. I love this country, and I love our state. You know, we have a great state. How many of you have traveled up and down the coastline recently, or driven across the valley? Well, it used to be this plentiful valley where we grew food. Now it's the valley of the shadow of death because they cut off the water. And I just heard, the Dust Bowl, the government-created Dust Bowl, I just heard that Jerry Brown has a solution for that. And I'm like, wow, where have you been? You know, where have you been all this time? You've got people who literally are growing the food. They're feeding the world. They're feeding our country. And you haven't bothered to get around to them until all of a sudden you're getting some challengers in your election? You know, I don't even know what to say to people like that. But I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that we can win this. And I don't believe we ought to go out with any other intention than to win the election. But the way that we win it matters. And when we involve a huge number of people, when we do a grassroots campaign, when we stand up and organize on issues and principles, then all of a sudden everybody knows what you're going to do when you get in office. You communicate that to them, you telegraph to them, you make them promises, but you have to follow through. And if you look at my record in the assembly, I have more no votes than anybody in both houses. I have asked for them to install a fully automatic no button. Because what I think we ought to do is I think we ought to be repealing laws. And I've heard the proposal that we ought to repeal 3 laws for every one that we pass. I think that's ridiculous. I think we ought to repeal 10 laws for every one that we pass. Because at the core, this revolution, the original revolution that founded our country, was about freedom. And we have watched our freedom be stripped away by tens of thousands of laws. Those are tens of thousands of deaths of freedom. You've heard of the death of 1,000 cuts. Well, that's what's happened to our country. And now they have these unelected boards and commissions, and they have more power over you and your private property and your livelihood than you do. Well, that goes counter to the founding documents, which said that all men are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which was going to be private property. That's how strongly they felt. Well, if you don't have freedom, you can't pursue happiness. And if they take away the Second Amendment, you can't defend your life. And, you know, I think the time has come for those of us who believe, as we believe, that we get out there in the streets and we get behind somebody who can win, but who will stand up for what we believe in. And I'm going to tell you something. A lot of people will say it's impossible to win this election without raising $50 million. And you know what? Every time somebody in the establishment tells you something's impossible, you should understand why they're communicating that to you. Because they don't want you to try. When I ran for election the first time, they said it's impossible to win with raising less than $50,000. That's 50. Well, I had never raised a single penny. I'd never run for office ever in my entire life. But there was nobody who was going to speak for me. There were 9 candidates. Every single one of them was going to endorse basically the tax increase that my assemblyman had voted for. And it was the tax increase that has pushed California's recession into a depression. That's why we don't have job creation. That's why we don't have people lining up at our borders to come in here other than for freebies. They're not coming for work anymore from the other states. They're leaving. People are leaving in pursuit of happiness and opportunity to Texas, Arizona, Nevada, anywhere but California. So you know what I did? When they said it's impossible, I made the impossible my to-do list. I walked door to door. The night before the election, I hit 60 houses while my competitors were out at parties celebrating their victory because they had all the money in the endorsements. Sound familiar? That's what they're going to do in this governor's race. As a matter of fact, when I hit those 60 houses, I'll never forget. Because it's embarrassing sometimes to walk up to a complete stranger's door and start talking to them about politics. And sometimes it's just downright fun. I walked to one house and the guy didn't want to talk to me when he was out in the street, but when I got to his house, he said, "Oh yeah, I'm voting for you." And I'm calling like 20 people tonight. I'm the former mayor of this town. I know this candidate, and he's not what we need. I ran into another guy and his dog was doing its business, and I got his vote. The man's, not the dog's. But you know, it can be done. It isn't going to be done the conventional way. We've already shown that no matter how much money you raise, if you put up somebody who doesn't believe in anything, you cannot win. I don't care if you have $170 million. If you don't have the right message, you can't win. So you know, one of the things I think we ought to start talking to people about is we ought to talk to them about things they care about. How many of you remember Bill Clinton? Do you remember the time he said, "I feel your pain"? You know, he was Don't get me started, ma'am. Do you know he said that in response to an activist, a homosexual activist who was upset about AIDS? Instead of yelling at them, instead of putting them down, he empathized with them. But what he did is he came out of nowhere and he connected with voters. And you know something very interesting? I happened to stand up the other day and wrote a letter and demanded some answers from an agency called CPS, Child Protective Services. How many of you here heard of the case of baby Sammy, a little baby who was ripped out of the arms of his mother because she wanted a second medical opinion? Okay, so almost all of you have heard of that. Well, guess what? I'm meeting people on the streets who have heard of that. I talked to a young lady today who works in the Chino Hills. She has some friends in the Chino Hills Police Department. They were discussing that case today. They were talking about me because I stood up against that and am pushing for reform. So all of a sudden, we found an issue that touches people. Because what's more personal than your children? Everybody, whether you have a child or not, you're either a parent, a grandparent, or something, you're connected to somebody, but all of us know in that 7-second message delivery that the government shouldn't be making the medical decisions for a child. The mother should, and the father should. Why? Since when does the government become the arbiter and the chooser of our health care decisions? Oh yeah. We just turned that over to the federal government, didn't we? And you know, a whole lot of people are having second thoughts about that. So what a great way to open up a conversation than to ask them if they heard about a mother and then talk about how the police, 5 officers were sent to her door with a social worker to enforce through coercion at the point of a gun her medical decisions. Can you believe that? But you know what she did? She was brilliant. Because she happened to be an immigrant, she's a German immigrant, and her husband's a Russian immigrant. They came from countries where you had to be skeptical of the government or you weren't alive. A knock on the door usually meant somebody was going to disappear. She rolled a video camera when the cops came in and demanded her baby. And they did it through the authority that has been granted to Child Protective Services. The police have limitations on their power. They can't just come in without a warrant, but if they have CPS with them, they can. Because we've empowered them with incredible emergency powers, much like we did after 9/11. That's how we got TSA. That's how we got such an overpowering NSA that thinks they can spy on everybody in the name of preventing terrorism. That's how we got that whole Patriot Act, that whole mentality that the government knows best. But this young lady did something brilliant. She stayed calm and she rolled film. And then I wrote a letter, I demanded answers, and the government agencies involved said, oh, we don't answer to anyone. We have absolute confidentiality. I said, really? So you are not going to tell me as an assemblyman where you got the power to go back to this person's home after they were seeking a second medical opinion, which is, in my last time I checked, isn't a crime. And I said, I want you to put that in writing. I sent it to the head of the entire department at the state level. And she wrote me back and she said, we don't answer to the legislature. That means we don't answer to the people. I couldn't believe she put it in writing. Meanwhile, I put this little letter that I wrote as a JPEG up on Facebook. For those of you who don't know what JPEG is, ask your grandchildren or children. But it's just simply a picture of the letter. In 2 hours, it got 27,000 hits. By the next day, it was over 55,000. The entire Russian community was calling Tim Donnelly for president. I had to break the news to him, I'm only running for governor. But you know, it really gave me an insight that there's entire communities out there that we don't touch, and then we don't motivate them to run for office because we put up candidates that are out of touch. And look, we've had some great candidates that are great human beings, but being successful in business is not necessarily translated into being successful in politics. You have to understand how to seize that moment. And you have to, more importantly, understand what your role is. This power that is held by myself at this moment in this seat does not belong to me, it belongs to you. This power that is held by the senator who was just up here does not belong to him, it belongs to you. It belongs to all of us, to we the people. That power is meant to be used to increase freedom. That's why I ran AB 351, which is a bill that prohibits the federal government from indefinitely detaining anyone under the color of law, and usually in the name of terrorism, on California soil. That means they cannot cart you off to jail and put you in a cell without due process, without a court date within 72 hours, without your habeas corpus, without going down that long list in the Bill of Rights of your rights. Because I believe the Constitution was meant to serve as a set of handcuffs for the government. We ought to throw the government up against the wall and cuff them. That's what they need. And you know what's interesting is I am probably the most conservative elected official in the state of California today. But I can tell you right now that my bill has enjoyed incredible bipartisan support, including from groups like the ACLU, Common Cause, all kinds of groups that you would describe as completely left-wing. But the idea of liberty, of individual liberty, of freedom from being coerced by your government, it doesn't know any party. That is an American concept. And that is one of the reasons why I believe that I have a good chance to win this election and to go fight and represent you in the most powerful seat in this state, which is the governor's seat. And I can't do it alone, though. I need your help. So God bless you and Godspeed.
If you have any questions, we're going to take about 2 or 3 minutes to do some questions here. And I'll read the questions so everybody will have the benefit of it. And thank you again. And then, again, we're trying to encourage you, if you have not engaged the political process, this is the time to get behind the candidates that represent your values. Here's the question. The environmentalists don't want nuclear power. They want solar. Now they don't want solar in the high desert. What do they want?
They want to have absolute control over you and your children and your livelihood and how many miles a day you drive. They want to have absolute control over every single aspect of your lives. That's why they're pushing Common Core through the schools. That's why they're pushing this RPS to 33%, then 50%. They want windmills on everybody's backyard except theirs. And I could go on and on.
What's RPS?
RPS is the Renewable Portfolio Standard, where they literally dictate the percentage. But it's silly and it's counterproductive because the power, wind power, is only usually available at night, the solar power during the day, but what they need is high ramp-up power. You get high ramp-up power from hydro plants, from natural gas. You also get it from nuclear. And to take nuclear offline completely and not look at the new nuclear facilities that are being spread all over the world, that is some of the cleanest, greenest power, and it is some of the safest power. And it's definitely something that should not be off the radar here in California.
Okay, here's a good one. Are you, we have a mixed multitude here. Are you a conservative on social issues, although Tea Party doesn't always get into those things, we generally do. Are you a conservative on social issues like marriage, the pro-life issue? Where do you land on those?
Well, it's real simple. First of all, I'm pro-life, and I am I'm one of 14 kids. How could I be anything else, okay? But that is in the Constitution. It's in the Declaration, one of the purposes of government. Secondly, look, marriage is not mentioned in the Constitution. So while I believe that marriage is a sacred covenant ordained by God between one man and one woman, I believe it belongs in the church. I think the government ought to get out of it, keep their hands off it, and not try to define it or redefine it.
My husband and I met you in the back of a pickup about 8 years ago at the border. What is your opinion about border security?
If I were President of the United States, I'm saying this to the Russian audience, I would have the border secured by tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. before I even had my first cup of coffee. It ain't complicated. Because what you do is real simple. You put up a physical barrier everywhere it makes sense. That enables our law enforcement to do their job. Secondly, you make it illegal and you enforce it down. You enforce every federal law, and you do not allow anyone to give any benefit to people who are coming across that border illegally. First of all, it's immoral because you have their blood on their hands when 500 of them die out in the desert. And secondly, it is already illegal, and we ought to enforce our laws. Why would we expect anybody else to respect our laws if we don't?
Okay. And then we'll do one last question. What will you do? Yes, what will you do to eliminate state and federal welfare?
That's a great question, because we have 33% of the welfare recipients in our state, and we only represent 13% of the population. So we have 2.5 times too many people on welfare. We have a whole lot of people on welfare that could be working if we didn't pay them not to. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to raise the bar, obviously. And secondly, we need to be absolutely 100% committed to changing and transforming the business climate in California so that there is a multitude of jobs, so that we have people coming here and competing for those jobs. And we ought to ought to reward the individual more than a government program. It's simple markets, and we need to get the financial incentives lined up correctly. And that would be, I would vigorously prosecute fraud, and I would make sure that we take care of those people who need help. But it should be a temporary thing. If you want to be connected to me, you've been handed an envelope, but there is another way to do it. How many of you brought your cell phones? Take your cell phone out right now, and I want you to, if you have a texting device, if you know how to text, I want you to type in the following numbers, and this will give you an immediate link to my website where you can connect with me and follow up. Are you ready? You're going to type the word, this is where you're sending the text, 77948. Oh, I love it, the cameraman's even doing it. 77948, that's the address that you're going to send the text to, and the text message is real simple, just type the word Patriot. And if you send, it will send you back a link that will get you onto my website. You can sign up for updates, you can donate, you can get involved, because together we can take back our freedoms in this state and make California the greatest, freest, and most prosperous state in the Union again. God bless you and Godspeed.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We take